Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live on air or anytime online at iHeartRadio, Odyssey, Amazon, TuneIn app, anywhere that you get your podcast, you'll be finding Herbally Yours, and in fact, nccradio.org, or download the WHPC app so that you get all 24 hours of wonderful programming from 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours consistently brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. And today we have as our guest Karen Howard. Karen is the CEO and Executive Director of Organic and Natural Health Association, which is a leading organization for consumer health advocacy since its inception in 2014. And with 4 decades of experience in healthcare policy, government relations, and organizational leadership, she is a visionary in advancing healthcare initiatives. And she is also the author of a new book called Upset is Optional. Say Goodbye to Unnecessary Suffering. And that's a brand new book that we're going to be talking with her about, which focuses on strategies to manage stress and anxiety. So thank you so much for being with us today, Karen.
Oh, it is a pleasure.
We've done many shows before in which we focus on your organicandnatural.org. So we also want to give that out, organic and natural, write out the whole thing, .org, for lots of information. What made you move into writing this book, Upset is Optional?
My mentor of many, many, many years passed away while I was on the floor of Supply Side West one year, fairly unexpectedly. And over his decades of teaching, he had moved into a more simplified version of some very elaborate Chinese philosophy. And his work had been turned into 10 practices, and a group of us became apprentices to these practices, and where we were taught the practices, practiced them, and were to share them with people everywhere. And I believed within my heart of hearts that it was my job to go out and share this information with as many people as I could. It took a while for me to get to that place where I could actually write it. And then, of course, it took a while to get it published. But this is really in honor of his legacy and my desire to continue his work.
Well, what does that mean? Upset is optional. That's like a challenging thought right there.
Right there, that's where to start. And we all know that there's suffering in the world. There's great suffering in the world, and there always will be suffering. But so much of what we go through in a day, a week, a month, and a year is actually our choice as to whether we want to get engaged with the situation and experience upset. And the difference between being able to avoid upset and to live with upset is that upset really has a physiological impact on your body. So as Bob Duggan used to say to me, people who have asthma are served by these practices because the more calm and peaceful they are and the more they avoid upset, the fewer asthma attacks that they have. You can think of other things. You're an expert at this, ulcers and things like that. And it deeply resonated for me.
That's true. And I think that some of that is inborn. I would say I'm one of those people who throughout my life, even in the midst of situations, people outside would say, how do you stay so calm when, we're just in a car crash or something obvious? There's a fire. You're not running around. I don't know. To me, it's like a Zen aspect that I feel I am watching everything, sort of like All the World's a Stage in Shakespeare. I'm watching it, but I'm not emotionally drawn into it. But I can't say that happened from any kind of practice. It's just, how I am. But you're saying that there are ways, like through deep breathing and stepping back, that you can be less drawn in to the chaos that's around all of us all the time.
Yes, and we are surrounded by chaos. And I think you're right. I think some people are born with sort of an innate sense of what it feels like to be in their body and be calm. Others need to practice more. Everything is on a spectrum. So I think that, yes, in times like this, everyone can find themselves in a situation where they're upset, and everyone has the ability to dial that back and figure out ways to get back to that place where they're calm.
Well, one thing you're bringing up, which is, very seasonal for sure, is about political stress, because that seems to be at a fervor that I don't ever remember experiencing before. I think it has happened in decades and centuries past, but we're certainly in that kind of very contentious situation at the moment.
We've been at this for just over 8 years. But 8 years, and to your point, is only 8 years and, over 200 years of democracy in this country. You're right. So I think that when we look at this situation that we're in now, even just looking at the language that people are using online, in social media, on television, in speeches, everything is designed to be inflammatory. And having that inflammatory response yourself inflames your body, right? So the question is how do we not completely check out? This is too important for people to not pay attention to and to take action. And how do we balance that with being able to not be infected by the language? Because language can be very infectious.
That's true. And if anybody has seen the book, Messages in Water by Dr. Omura, he did some very interesting research where he actually projected different sayings into water and then was able to freeze the water and look at the crystalline patterns that are formed in the water. And although some people have debunked his work, I actually worked with him doing it, and there was a lot of really excellent research there that looked at a physical change in molecular structure, which of course our bodies are also mostly water, depending on what kind of saying is reflected around that individual. So, there's so many ways that we can feel it and that it can be measured. But in your book, you talk about different things that people can do to actually protect themselves from being in a greater state of anxiety, but yet still be engaged.
Correct. So one of those suggestions is create your own word wall. So I know I have words that I use pretty regularly, sometimes just about myself. I can sit around and call myself a moron pretty easily. And in words like idiot, stupid, those are language words that just don't help anything. So what are your alternative words? And I remember when my kids were little, Mad Libs. So sometimes it's just fun to change your language and say popsicle instead of whatever word comes to mind that might not be sayable on radio or TV. So to try to play with that even if you're only doing it in your head, because I think it's one thing to try and find words. Like I work hard to not say the word but. I always substitute it with and. It changes the meaning of what it is you're actually saying. So if I am in my head and I'm saying that was the most moronic statement I've ever heard, that still infects my body. But if I can sit and say to myself, that was interesting, and I say that was interesting a lot these days, and be more of an observer instead of participating in this back and forth with language that's harmful, I find myself being able to be a better listener, certainly not engage in any sort of hostile conversation, and get through my day, because I am a political animal at heart. So I love to soak this in, and sometimes I will even just turn it off so I can deeply breathe and get back to my position.
Well, in your book, Upset is Optional, the subtitle is Say Goodbye to Unnecessary Suffering. So you're saying then, by using these techniques that you lay out, such as story versus phenomena, know the difference, and save a relationship. What does that mean?
Oh, this is one of my favorite practices. Human beings are great storytellers. It's how we've shared our lore over centuries. We're really good storytellers. And I don't want us to lose that ever, because that's one of the most fun things about being in a relationship. However, there is a difference between what's a story and what's the actual phenomena in front of you. So, when you're watching a debate on television between two presidential candidates, there's phenomena. The two of them are standing there, the two of them are talking, and the two of them are saying words. And then there's a story. There's a story that you've created about one particular candidate. Let's just call them, for sake, I don't know, Martha Washington and Mary Todd Lincoln, because that sort of throws everything off too.
Oh, like, two women?
Two women, two first ladies, and then no one knows what you're talking about because they can't associate a negative story with that human being. They're looking for the story to tie in. And it's like, no, let's look at the phenomena. Let's look at what's actually happening in front of us. The car stopped and the person did not get hit. The car didn't stop and the bicycle got hit. That's phenomena. The story is somebody wasn't paying any attention and look what happened. Might be a true story, might not. So it's really important to be able to digest those concepts and be able to say, is what I'm hearing factual? Is it data? Is it, can I listen to that part of it? Versus the emotional rant or conversation that I'm getting worked up in about how people feel and how things might be, when on my experience and my phenomena may or may not match that.
So it's sort of a self-determination where you're watching a scene and you want to step back and determine if it's totally a phenomena or if it's actually the story that you're participating in.
Correct.
That's an interesting differentiation. I certainly never heard about that, because you say know the difference and save a relationship. What do you mean by save a relationship?
Well, I think of relationships. I can speak to the one in the book that's about my mom. Like, Mom was a great storyteller, and the stories, and my grandmother was as well. And so the stories went on and on and on and on. And then I would make stories up about my mother's dysfunction. So I had to figure out a way to create something larger, reframing, to take in another practice. These 10 practices really do overlap quite a bit. So I had to find another story that was big enough for me to live in. And I had to change the story I had about my mom, and wonder why I hadn't asked questions all along that could have given me more information, instead of just taking what was in front of me, a lot of phenomena, and try and build a story around that. The flip side of this is that sometimes the story works better and make my world more calm and comfortable, so I could be around her and she could be calm and comfortable. And that was towards the end of her life. So sometimes it's almost like a matter of life and death when it comes to your relationships with the people you love.
So then you're actually reframing it so you're not so reactive, rather than changing their pattern. Because their pattern is their pattern, but it's your reaction to their pattern.
Yes.
By taking a step back and seeing, what is the trigger and how can I just untrigger it. So that's a very good technique. And I want to remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live online at any podcast venue, and also join us all the time by just downloading the app at WHPC, our own little app that we have. And thank you so much for visiting with us today. Our guest is Karen Howard. She is the CEO and Executive Director of Organic and Natural Health Association, which is a leading organization for consumer health advocacy. Since its inception in 2014, although to me it seems like it was yesterday and not 10 years ago. So thank you so much for joining us today, Karen. We're talking about not just organic and natural, although you can give us an update there if you'd like, but we're talking about your new book called Upset is Optional. What a great name.
Thank you.
So what is going on in the world of organicandnatural.org?
We are celebrating our 10th year, and I'm with you. I can't, I'm a little startled that it's been 10 years. It has gone by very fast. And I, I love my job. I love my job because the work that we do, I'm going to tie it back to one of our practices, is serving 7 generations. So let's just take synthetic biology as one of the things that we're very engaged in, and the use of GMO inputs to make fake milk and fake meat is a conversation that we picked up and owned in COVID, before COVID, but really have taken it and run with it and are working diligently to find ways for disclosure, whatever that looks like, and continuing to do research with HRI labs on this topic. And the reason I feel like this is really important work is because right now it's critical in the generation that I live in terms of the future of things like organic and natural, because there will be no lines. The lines are already blurry enough, and the lines will be continually blurred, which does 2 things. It really jeopardizes the health and wellness of the land that we live off of, the farmers who produce the food we live off of, and the 3 generations that are coming down the road that I may never know. And at the same time, it does nothing to honor the 3 generations that got us to the place, how we have developed our own agriculture practices, how we have really, we've taken back ownership of the land in so many ways. And yeah, we've made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I feel committed to the 7 generations that I represent. And when I do that work, I'm complete. It's when I do something for the sake of just saying, making a living, that I am unhappy and unfulfilled.
So at organicandnatural.org, could our listeners find ways to get on a newsletter? Or I know that you often have action steps about whatever's going on where you can make a difference politically by voting on an issue or making your voice heard to your representative. And I know you often have easy links to use to do that.
So on our website at Organic and Natural, you can go to the news, and it directly picks you up into our news feeds on LinkedIn, all the different media outlets, and you can see exactly what we're up to there. We're starting a new initiative with the new Congress through a group that we've established called My Health Alliance, which will deal with the definition of organic and the protection of the organic standard. And that's probably going to be our next call to action, although we're still watching the Farm Bill to ensure at some point that SNAP beneficiaries are able to not only buy their ho-hos, but to also buy vitamin D3.
Yes, and I remember you had a testing, something where people could get a vitamin D test done. Is that still available?
We are not doing that study yet, but we're contemplating doing a new one, which would enable people to participate and monitor their vitamin D, omega-3, and potentially magnesium levels. And then from that data, we use that data to make policy changes on Capitol Hill. So those things take a little time to get together, but we are definitely looking at repeating that and expanding the work.
I loved when you had that available, but do you know, just on the aside, that Medicare no longer covers vitamin D levels?
I am aware. I have good friends that complain to me about that quite a bit. You have to make a really hard case for Medicare to pay for a very simple test that does not cost much money. And I think that's something that the alliance that I work with just on vitamin D is having conversations about. It's amazing to me. If you get your vitamin D level, my commercial, between 40 and 60 nanograms per milliliter, you're going to reduce your risk of preterm birth by 60%. And the other ramifications for simple healthcare issues are insanely powerful. So we're very passionate about continuing to get that message out and providing ways, education on that, and providing ways to change the minds of legislators and, more importantly, agency officials, because it's been a struggle.
It is. And then, there are certain options like just pay for your own vitamin D test if you can afford it. I mean, it's not millions of dollars to do that.
It's not. But, look at it this way. That's true. And seniors may be in a situation to do that. But the people most at disadvantage are people with dark skin. So the African American population suffers way more disproportionately to low vitamin D levels. And when we took the vitamin D pregnancy piece to the FDA, and explained the data, they told us that we didn't account for women who were seeking public health services at a university hospital and pregnant. To then they might have gone outside, Ellen, and got for 20, 40 minutes, taken 50% of their clothes off to get vitamin D, when in fact they're working multiple jobs, have young children, taking public transportation. When that was pointed out to them, the response was, "There's no room for rationale."
That's a big part of politics, right there. What you just said. There's no room for rationale. It's just a very funny statement, but unfortunately true. Unfortunately
so.
So it's so great that you're doing that work to, first of all, bring that kind of awareness to people. And of course, there was an article, since we're talking about vitamin D, you might have seen it very recently in the news, that someone died from overdosing on vitamin D. That they, put out there, which is so unusual.
It's very unusual. And I think, as we go we're all pretty good about going to the doctors and having a blood work. And I'm going to confess, my last blood test for vitamin D had me over 130. And it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. But I was like, whoops, yeah, I saw that coming. So even those of us who are well-intended need to be continually monitoring and making sure that we are keeping within those levels.
Yeah, it's definitely a good idea. And I'm so inspired that, not only are you a leader in the community and so involved all these years as director of Organic and Natural Health Association, which I think I saw you're having a new president come in, or some people who are going to be helping.
Yes.
I just saw that yesterday on one of the newsletters.
Yes,
so,
Todd Norton of Aker Biomarine.
So that'll be, helpful to you. But now you also have your own book. Is this your first book, Upset is Optional?
It is indeed.
It's wonderful that you're taking all the years of study and even, spiritual practice that you've learned and sharing it with others, because by not being so triggered by all the things that are happening both in the environment, the political discussion, the food discussions, there's so much, as well as the traumatic events that people are happening because of weather changes and all that stuff, staying centered through it is still the best idea.
It's important to do that. I mean, there's no time for, this is not a time for despair. This is not a time to give up. This is not a time to not go to the polls. No, we're in this for the long haul, and every vote counts. The work that got us to where we are so we can vote is pretty substantial. And all those down ballot votes are equally important, because I only know one example of someone who's ascended to national level success without ever serving office before. So keep in mind, the PTA, the city council, school representatives, all of these things are equally important.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to bring up, especially with what's going on in the schools also, majorly. Now, give an example of how somebody could, use practices in your book moving forward on a daily basis to help keep themselves healthy and calm.
That's such a great question, because it's a great book to read and then you put it down. And the one thing I do try to emphasize in the book is that it requires practice. So the documentation that we were put through is fairly substantial, but I'm going to boil it down into a few simple things. Pick a practice that you want to work on, not for a week, but maybe for a month. And some people like to keep journals. Some people like to put a message across their screensaver on their computer that reminds them what their practice is. Some people, and I was a big proponent of this, use sticky notes and put it on mirrors in their car. If you're a road rager, put that, be peaceful today on your steering wheel, or just wear a rubber band. Another good one is to switch your watch to the wrong hand if you're wearing a watch. And then you'll just go, today's my day that I am to be peaceful. So that is my recommendation, that you stick with one practice, do it for a month, and then feel like you can move on to the next one.
Well, just saying something like be peaceful, that's not necessarily so easy for some people.
It is not easy at all. And one of the great lessons in the book is something that I continue to remind myself, especially before an interview, is to deeply breathe. We tend to breathe from our chest. We don't breathe from our diaphragm. All good things come from breathing from a diaphragm. So I think that's a great one. And the other one that we didn't talk about, I think, is also nice, is because it's a great way to start your day, is to design your day and pick a mood. So I like to get up before I get my feet on the floor. I like to design my mood as peaceful. And then I use these little tactics all day long to like do a check-in, do a body scan, flip a rubber band and say, hey, are you peaceful right now? And then make corrections.
That rubber band trick is a really good one. I've used that for literally thousands of patients in the more than 60 years that I was in practice, to where if you find yourself, first you have to have that awareness moment. Oh, I'm checking in. Oh, I'm not feeling peaceful. And you actually snap the rubber band and have a peaceful thought ready to use as an alternative within your consciousness.
Beautifully said. It does just require practice. It is not something that is innate for everyone.
But it's so nice that you took the time to actually, things that you've struggled with yourself, to share it in a very practical, beautiful book called Upset is Optional. I think that was a very good name. Who thought of that name?
That would be my mentor, Bob Duggan, who would say upset is optional. And now my children use that on me. Upset is optional, Mom.
Oh, you mean if you're getting upset with them, that's pretty good. They turn it around. That's very wise of them. And is there any kind of like using exercise, to help offset feelings of being upset?
Well, I am a boot camper, so I'm out 4 mornings a week at 6 o'clock in the Washington, D.C. heat and humidity. So if I thought that exercise would solve all my problems, I'd be done. And yes, I think that everybody needs to find their way into that mood that they're designing for themselves. My practice back in the early days was when I was walking my dogs, that I would take that just to be peaceful with myself. And that's usually worked for me. So I do believe, I've always believed getting out in nature or exercising. But remember that some people will just use exercise as an escape.
Well, even if they're just using it as escape, it's probably better to do it than just sit on the couch all day. But then you can add in some of that, more elevating conscious thought processes, which is great.
Yes, for sure.
So it sounds like this book is good for people just starting out or people who have been on the path for a while if they'd like to not be upset, because upset is optional. What a really cute name for your new book. And thank you so much for being our guest today on Herbally Yours.
Thank you, Ellen. It's been wonderful.
And you can find Karen at upsetisoptional.com and also organicandnatural.org. Well, thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.